The night Daniel Harper signed his name on the contract, his hands were shaking, not because he loved the woman sitting across from him, but because he had no other way left to save his son. The paper lay between them on the polished oak table, its words cold and legal: contract marriage, no emotional obligations, 1 year. Daniel swallowed hard and glanced at the wheelchair beside the table. In it sat Grace Whitmore, her legs motionless beneath a soft cream blanket, her posture straight, her eyes sharp with a quiet sadness that looked far older than her 27 years. This marriage wasn't born from romance. It was born from desperation on both sides. Daniel was a 34-year-old single father, working 2 jobs since his wife passed away 3 years earlier. His 8-year-old son, Noah, needed surgery, an expensive one. Insurance had denied them. Loans were impossible. When Daniel was offered a job as a live-in caretaker for a wealthy but paralyzed woman, and later, a contract marriage that came with full financial support, he felt ashamed for even considering it. But then he thought of Noah's pale face in the hospital bed, and shame became a luxury he could no longer afford. Grace signed first. Her signature was neat, controlled. She didn't look at Daniel as she slid the paper toward him. "Don't worry," she said quietly. "We'll be strangers sharing a last name, nothing more." Daniel nodded and signed, sealing a deal that neither of them truly wanted, but both desperately needed. Grace Whitmore had once been fearless. Before the accident, she had been an architect, climbing ladders at construction sites, sketching buildings late into the night. A drunk driver had stolen her mobility in a single, violent moment. Her parents had passed soon after, leaving her alone with money, a massive estate, and a condition in her father's will. To inherit full control of the company, she had to be married within 2 years. Grace refused pity, refused romance, and refused to let anyone love her out of obligation. A contract marriage felt safer, cleaner, controlled. The first weeks were painfully awkward. Daniel moved into the guest room of the grand Whitmore house, his footsteps echoing in hallways that felt more like a museum than a home. He cooked meals, cleaned quietly, and helped Grace only when she asked. He never touched her wheelchair without permission. He never asked about the accident. He treated her with a respect that felt almost distant. Grace noticed everything. She noticed how Daniel packed Noah's lunch every morning with little notes drawn in crooked handwriting. She noticed how he talked to his son at night on video calls, lowering his voice, hiding his fear behind jokes and smiles. She noticed how he never once looked at her with pity. And Daniel noticed things too. He noticed how Grace stayed awake late into the night, staring out the window as if mourning a life that had ended too soon. He noticed how she clenched her jaw whenever doctors were mentioned. He noticed how she insisted on doing things herself, even when it clearly hurt. Their challenges were constant and unspoken. Grace struggled with her dependence on others, hiding the way people assumed her life was already over. Daniel struggled with guilt, guilt for using this marriage as a means to an end, guilt for slowly beginning to care. One evening the power went out during a storm. The house fell into darkness, thunder shaking the windows. Daniel lit candles and went to check on Grace. She was in her room, her breathing shallow, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. "I hate storms," she admitted, her voice barely steady. Daniel didn't hesitate. He sat on the floor beside her, not touching, just present. "You're not alone," he said softly. For the first time since the contract was signed, Grace cried. Weeks turned into months. Noah had his surgery and began to recover. Daniel started working fewer hours. He cooked dinner for Grace without being asked. She began asking his opinion on designs for a new community center, one accessible to everyone, especially those in wheelchairs. But the contract loomed between them like a wall. 1 year, no emotions. Then came the night that changed everything. Grace woke up screaming from a nightmare, her body frozen, her chest tight with panic. Daniel ran to her room without thinking. He held her hands as she trembled, grounding her with his voice, his warmth, his steady presence. And for the first time, Grace didn't pull away. She rested her forehead against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Daniel felt something crack open inside him, fear, tenderness, hope, all tangled together. "I'm scared I'll always be alone," Grace whispered. Daniel swallowed. "You're not broken, Grace, and you're not a burden, you're you." That night, the contract stopped mattering. Their challenges didn't disappear. Grace still couldn't walk. Daniel still feared losing everything if he crossed invisible lines. But they chose honesty. They talked. They argued. They laughed. Grace let Daniel help more. Daniel let Grace see his doubts and failures. When the one-year mark arrived, Grace called her lawyers. Daniel expected the end. Instead, Grace tore the contract in half. "I don't want a caretaker," she said. "I want a partner. If you'll stay, not because of money or obligation, but because you choose me." Daniel knelt in front of her wheelchair, tears in his eyes. "I already chose you," he said. They remarried months later, this time without contracts, without conditions. Noah walked Grace down the aisle, holding her hand with pride. The Whitmore house finally felt like a home. Grace never walked again, but she stood tall in every way that mattered. Daniel never became rich overnight, but he became whole. And together, they proved that love doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with choice, courage, and the willingness to stay when walking away would be easier. Sometimes, the strongest marriages don't start with romance. They start with two broken people deciding to heal together.